12 years. Allie, that's a long time to be an assistant. The words floated across the sleek glass desk, poison wrapped in silk. I sat motionless, the corners of my mouth refusing to twitch, my eyes locked on Marcus Grant, the man I'd reported to for nearly a decade. Vice President Marcus Grant. His tone was casual, almost friendly, but the weight of it pressed against my chest like a boulder. I already knew. The signs had been building for months. Sudden cancellations, department emails that never reached me, conversations that died the second I walked into a room, and of course, the new golden boy, Caleb, loud, eager, and always within arm's reach of Marcus, coffee in one hand, compliments in the other. "I understand," I said, folding my hands in my lap, even as my heart pounded in my ears. "Is this effective immediately?" Marcus looked almost relieved I wasn't crying or yelling, but that was never my style. "You'll receive 2 weeks severance. HR will help you transition out by the end of the day. And for what it's worth, Allie, this isn't personal." Of course it wasn't. It never is when they gut you without blinking. "I see," I said, rising with practiced grace. "Then let me be the first to congratulate Caleb." Marcus cleared his throat, uncomfortable with my composure. "He's got potential. We need people who think big and say yes to everything." "You suggest?" I finished with a polite smile. I extended my hand. Marcus hesitated, then shook it. His grip was firm, but I noticed the slight tremble. Somewhere, maybe, he knew this wasn't right. But he did it anyway. The door clicked shut behind me. I walked past the cubicles without looking up. Whispers were already starting. At my desk, neat as always, I pulled out a cardboard box from beneath. I'd kept it there just in case. You don't last 12 years in corporate without preparing for sudden endings. As I packed, a black USB drive tucked into my far left drawer caught my eye. Unmarked. Ordinary looking. But it wasn't. Over 6 years, I had built the company's internal tracking and inventory system. Bug fixes, custom patches, updates, all living on that drive. I hadn't touched it since Caleb started shadowing me. I slipped it into my bag. "Allie?" It was Jenna from compliance, hovering at the edge of my cubicle, looking pale. "Is it true?" I nodded once. "But why?" "You do everything. Half this department would fall apart without you." I smiled, more genuinely this time. "Well," I said, "we're about to find out." I walked toward the exit, the familiar sting rising in the back of my throat. This wasn't just a job ending. It was a part of me. 12 years of loyalty. Solving problems before they became disasters. Cleaning up messes no one ever knew existed. No performance review, no thank you. Just a handshake and a door. The parking lot was unusually bright. I sat in my car, letting the silence wrap around me like a weighted blanket. My phone buzzed. "Lunch this weekend? You've been MIA lately. SIS. I stared at it. I hadn't told anyone. Not yet. I needed to process this alone first. Back at the office, I imagined Caleb sliding into my old chair, firing up the system I had spent years building. He had no idea how much of it was custom-coded. No idea how delicate it was without the right maintenance, and no idea that the only person who truly understood it had just walked out. With a quiet smile and a black USB tucked into her purse. That night, I poured a glass of wine and opened my laptop. Logged into a private backup account, one no one knew existed. The system was stable, for now. But if someone made even a minor change in the wrong module, tomorrow would be interesting. The next morning, I woke early, out of habit more than anything else. Sunlight filtered through the curtains as I sipped my coffee. No alarms, no urgent emails, no endless to-do lists. For the first time in over a decade, my day was my own. And yet, a strange tension buzzed under my skin, like the charged air before a thunderstorm. At 9:13 a.m., it started. My phone lit up. Jenna. Allie, something's wrong with the system. Files are missing. Ben from IT. Weird question. How did the inventory software log updates? We can't access anything after Q3. Tomorrow from accounting, emergency. Are you available to talk? Please. I leaned back in my chair, heart steady. I wasn't gloating. I wasn't even angry. I just felt inevitable, like watching dominoes fall, because the custom system I built worked beautifully. If you understood its intricacies, quarterly updates, monthly manual reconciliations, cascading backups that locked if mishandled. It was all documented. In a guide, Caleb had bragged he didn't need to read. My phone vibrated again. Jenna. Marcus is losing it. System crashed. We can't process orders. Help! Another message seconds later. Unknown number. Ally. This is Marcus. Call me immediately. I smiled softly and set the phone down. It buzzed and buzzed and buzzed until finally it stopped, leaving a heavy, satisfying silence behind. At 9:57 a.m., the corporate website went offline. Would you like a second version that's even sharper, with a bit more of a thriller tone? Your writing is already great, by the way. Amazing tension buildup. By 10:15 a.m., the VP's direct line was blowing up. Vendors, clients, and internal teams were all scrambling. They couldn't access inventory data. 7/17 had been chaos, and I wasn't even there. I hadn't sabotaged anything. I wasn't being malicious. I had simply left. The house of cards Marcus had built on arrogance and favoritism collapsed the moment it lost the one thing he had grossly underestimated: knowledge. At 11:06 a.m., sitting in my favorite cafe with a second cup of coffee, I finally opened the email Marcus had sent. Subject: urgent. Request for assistance. Ally, I realize yesterday's conversation may have been abrupt. However, given the unexpected technical issues we're currently facing, I would greatly appreciate any documentation, notes, or guidance you can provide on the tracking and inventory systems you previously managed. This would be a tremendous help to the team and the company as a whole. We are willing to compensate you for your time. Please contact me as soon as possible. Regards, Marcus Grant, VP, Operations. I reread it twice, savoring the irony. 12 years, and all it took was 24 hours for them to realize the value they had thrown away. I glanced at the clock, 11:15 a.m. Corporate would just now be starting the emergency crisis meeting, the meeting I used to organize, prepare notes for, calmly lead toward a solution. Instead, they had Caleb. And according to Jenna's texts, Caleb was busy blaming the servers, IT, and even the outdated system, never once admitting he had no idea how anything truly worked. I closed Marcus's email without replying. Some lessons are best learned the hard way. By noon, LinkedIn was buzzing. Rumors of layoffs, client delays stacking up. Eversource Logistics, the company's biggest client, allegedly pulled a scheduled meeting over technical instability concerns. I didn't dance around my apartment. I didn't celebrate. Instead, I felt a solemn satisfaction. Not because they were struggling, but because the truth always surfaces, eventually. The problem was never me. It was the culture, a culture that rewarded noise over loyalty, flash over substance. I had been the quiet foundation they never noticed until it crumbled. And now, without me, they were standing on quicksand. My phone buzzed again. Another message. Jenna this time. Just a heads up. Marcus just got called into an emergency session with the CEO. People are furious. They're asking why you weren't promoted instead of Caleb. I smiled faintly, picturing Marcus sweating through his $1,000 suit, fumbling for answers. The river was rushing now. pulling everything loose and unstable downstream. But like my father used to say, the rocks stay steady. And I was steady, steadier than I had ever been. By Monday morning, the damage was uncontainable. The client, portal, down, internal systems, partially restored but full of errors, deliveries, delayed, duplicated, or misrouted. Vendors, furious, clients, panicking. Inside the company, Marcus was unraveling fast. Jenna's texts painted the scene vividly. Marcus looks like he hasn't slept in 3 days. CEO tore into him in front of everyone. Caleb's literally sweating through his shirt. I hadn't replied to a single one of Marcus's emails or messages. It wasn't about revenge. It was about respect. 12 years. 12 years of loyalty. Late nights, solving invisible problems, training interns, smoothing, conflicts, covering others' mistakes. And they'd told me assistants don't get promoted. Now all the things I used to quietly hold together were visibly falling apart. At 11:30 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but something told me to pick up. Hello? Allie Peterson? A calm, professional woman's voice. Yes, this is she. This is Angela Browning, Executive Assistant to Darren Shaw, CEO of Westbridge Logistics. I blinked. Westbridge, a major competitor. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time, she continued. Mr. Shaw would like to meet with you this week. Your name came highly recommended. My breath caught. May I ask who recommended me? There was a pause. I believe it was one of your former clients at Eversource. They said, and, I quote, she's the only reason we renewed with them last year. I exhaled slowly. I'd be happy to meet with Mr. Shaw. Wonderful, Angela said. We'll set something up for Thursday morning. When the call ended, I just sat there. No panic, no anxiety, just possibility. That evening, I met my sister, Elena, for dinner. Practical, composed Elena. HR director at a healthcare firm, someone who never missed a step. We ate at a small Italian place near the river, the kind we used to visit as kids, back when we thought life was always fair. She listened quietly as I told her everything. The firing, the crash, the aftermath. Then I showed her Marcus's original termination email. Cold, detached, as if it had been written for a printer, not a person. Elena's eyes darkened. You know you could sue, she said, cutting her pasta with surgical precision. Not just wrongful termination, discrimination, 12 years without promotion. That's not a coincidence. I don't want to sue, I said softly. I want to build something better. Her eyebrow arched. Meaning? I want to work somewhere that values me, where I'm more than background noise. Somewhere I can grow, lead, be seen. Elena nodded slowly, then smiled. You always did like fixing broken systems. Only when they're worth fixing, I said. We clinked wine glasses over that. The next day, another email arrived, from Paula Hensley, a senior director I had supported years ago before she changed departments. Allie, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I should have spoken up when I heard what Marcus did. But I was afraid of making waves, of risking my job. It wasn't right. Everyone here knows it. You were the glue. Whatever you do next, they'll be lucky to have you. And if there's ever anything I can do, say the word. It made me pause. Because for years I thought no one noticed, that everything I did was invisible. But it turns out, invisibility isn't absence. People feel your absence, especially when the whole system starts falling apart without you. And now, they were feeling it. Every single day. Would you like me to also create a super short version or a visual timeline summary if you want to post it somewhere, like LinkedIn? Of course. Here's a polished rewrite of the full piece you shared, keeping the emotion and tone intact while smoothing out the flow, grammar, and structure. It starts to break where you used to hold it together. That afternoon, I logged onto my laptop and updated my resume. It was 3:23 p.m., and it had been years. I opened LinkedIn and quietly toggled my open to work setting to public. Within an hour, I had 3 messages. By the next morning, I had 10. The world was opening in a way it never had before. Not because I shouted, not because I burned it all down, but because I had quietly walked away from what didn't value me and chose to let my work speak for itself. And it was speaking loudly. The Westbridge Logistics building was everything Summit Edge wasn't. Modern, open, inviting. The receptionist greeted me by name and offered espresso while I waited. The air smelled like citrus and fresh ambition, not desperation and old. Coffee. At exactly 9 a.m., Angela appeared with a warm smile and escorted me to the top floor. "Mr. Shaw is looking forward to meeting you," she said, then added in a quieter voice, "Everyone here is talking about what happened at Summit Edge. You made quite an impression." I gave a polite nod, though my heart was pounding. I wasn't nervous. Not exactly, but after being written off as just an assistant for over a decade, walking into a meeting as a sought-after candidate felt surreal. Darren Shaw stood as I entered his office. Tall, early 50s, dressed in a blazer without a tie. Confident without being arrogant. "Allie," he said warmly, extending his hand. "We finally meet." "Thank you for the invitation," I replied, shaking it firmly. "Please sit. Can I get you anything?" "I'm good, thank you." We settled into leather chairs across from each other, sunlight spilling in through the glass behind him. He didn't waste time with small talk. "I've spoken with several people. Vendors, clients, even a few of your old teammates. They all said the same thing. You were the backbone of that department." I stayed quiet. "They also said you were overlooked, passed over, undervalued." Still, I said nothing, just met his gaze. Darren continued. "Our industry doesn't often reward quiet excellence. It chases the loudest voice in the room, but I'm more interested in the one who keeps the machine running when no one's looking." Something loosened in my chest at those words. Something I hadn't realized had been tight for years. He slid a folder across the table. "I'd like you to review this." Inside was an offer letter. Director of Operations, Regional Supply Chain Division. Full benefits. Competitive salary, 35% more than what I made at Summit Edge. And most shocking of all, a personal budget to build a support team from the ground up. "I want someone who understands the ground level and the strategy," he said, "and I want you to hire who you trust. Start fresh. We're expanding into 3 new markets, and I need stability at the core." I looked up, stunned. "You're offering me a division?" "I'm offering you autonomy. I don't micromanage. You've already proven you can manage circles around most so-called leaders in this field." The voice in my head, the one Summit Edge had cultivated over the years, tried to whisper, "You're just an assistant. Don't get ahead of yourself." But I silenced it. Because I wasn't just anything. I never had been. I nodded once. "I'd like a few days to consider." "Take your time," Darren said, "but we'd like you to start as soon as possible." As Angela walked me out, she grinned. "We've never seen Darren this excited about a hire. You've shaken up more than one executive office this week." Outside, I stood on the sidewalk, watching traffic buzz past. My phone buzzed. A text from Jenna. "Jenna, Marcus was just escorted. Out of the building. Effective immediately." No warning. I stared at the message, rereading it twice. Then another text came in. "Jenna, Tamara from accounting says Dan is stepping in temporarily, but there's talk of a full audit. They're blaming Marcus for the system crash and the client fallout. Everyone's nervous. It had finally happened. Not just a ripple, a full break." And suddenly I wasn't angry. I wasn't even satisfied. I was ready. That evening, I sat at my dining table with a pen in hand and the Westbridge offer letter in front of me. I thought about every late night at Summit Edge, every ignored suggestion, every time I'd been praised privately but kept hidden publicly. And then I thought about the team I used to work with, the people like Jenna and Tamara, still stuck under leaders who never saw them. Maybe now I could be the kind of leader I had always needed. I signed the offer. Then I picked up my phone and began writing a message, not to Marcus or Caleb or anyone at Summit Edge, but to Jenna. Me. Hey, I accepted a new role today, a real one. They're giving me a budget to build a team from scratch. If you're interested, I want you with me. 10 seconds later, Jenna. Name the time and place. I'm in. I smiled and sent 2 more messages. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up the list I had quietly kept for years. The names of people who deserved better. 3 weeks after signing with Westbridge, I walked into my new office, a corner suite on the 5th floor overlooking the skyline. The nameplate on the door read, Allie Peterson, Director of Regional Operations. I stood there for a moment before stepping inside, letting it sink in. I hadn't been handed this role, I had earned it, and now I had something even rarer than a promotion. I had trust, a new company, a blank canvas, a team to build from the ground up, and I already knew exactly who I wanted. Jenna was the first hire. She put in her resignation the day after I texted her. She didn't even bother giving 2 weeks. She didn't need to. Tamara followed. Then another from IT. Word spread quickly, like it always does in our industry. I didn't poach anyone. I simply offered something better. Respect. A voice. A seat at the table. I held interviews, reviewed applications, but half the candidates came from people I had worked with before. People who had seen how I operated, quietly, efficiently, without ego. By the end of the month, we were ready, and this time, we were building something real. Would you like me to also format it for something specific, like a blog post, LinkedIn, article, or a more novel-like style too? Of course. Here's a rewritten version of your story, keeping the heart of it but polishing the flow, tightening the pacing, and strengthening the emotional impact. At exactly 22:18, my team assembled. Sharp, loyal, experienced professionals who had been overlooked for far too long. At our first meeting, I stood in a bright conference room, marker in one hand and a deep sense of purpose in the other. I'm not here to micromanage you, I told them. You know how to do your jobs. You've done them for years without recognition. What I want to know is, what tools do you need to do them better? That simple question sparked 2 hours of honest, passionate conversation. We talked about broken workflows, outdated software, communication gaps, and the burnout that came from carrying departments that never thanked us. We didn't just build a new structure. We dismantled the old one, brick by brick, and built something better. Meanwhile, Summit Edge was unraveling. A week after I started at Westbridge, one of their major clients, Eversource Logistics, quietly pulled out. No press release, just silence. Through Jenna, who still had friends inside, the gossip flooded in. Marcus had been fired. Caleb was shuffled into a meaningless role. The CEO was furious. The board had launched an internal investigation after someone anonymously sent copies of internal emails to HR, emails that exposed Marcus's mistreatment of long-term employees and his cover-ups as systems failed. I never found out who sent those emails, but I had my suspicions. Late one afternoon, my phone rang, a number I hadn't seen in months. Allie? A hesitant voice. It's Dan, from Summit. I hadn't spoken to him since the day I cleared my desk. I'm sure you've heard. We've taken some big hits, he said awkwardly. I stayed silent. I just wanted to ask, off the record, was it you who sent the emails? I smiled to myself. No, Dan, I said, but I'm glad someone did. He sighed. We were wrong about you, about a lot of things. I looked around. At my office. The plants by the window, the framed note Jenna had left on my desk that morning. Real leaders don't need a title. Thanks, Dan, I said gently. But I already am. And then I hung up. That Friday, our team gathered on a rooftop bar to celebrate our first month together. We laughed, shared stories, and talked about real things, not just numbers and deadlines, but goals and dreams, and how it felt to be truly seen for the first time in years. Summit Edge used to be my plan for the next 10 years, Jenna said, sipping her wine. Now, I can't believe I stayed as long as I did. You stayed because you believed in the work, I said. We all did. And now? Tamara asked. Now, I said, smiling, we do it on our own terms. The sun dipped below the skyline, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel replaceable. I felt exactly who I'd always been, capable, steady, and finally in a place that recognized my worth. 3 months into my role, Westbridge's quarterly report went public. 32% increase in regional efficiency. 2 major accounts acquired from competitors. Employee retention at an all-time high. At the bottom of the internal announcement, a note from CEO Darren Shaw. Exceptional leadership begins with those who understand the work. Ally Peterson and her team exemplify what happens when you recognize talent and trust it. This is just the beginning. I stared at those words for a long time. 2 days later, while reviewing a logistics proposal, a news alert popped up. Summit Edge to be acquired by Global Axe Freight Systems, following client loss and internal turmoil. The article was clinical, full of talk about strategic partnerships and refocusing priorities. But between the lines, the truth was clear. They'd lost 5 major accounts in 6 months. 3 had followed me to Westbridge. The rest realized there was no one left who truly understood the work. Caleb had left a month earlier. Dan had retired early. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel cruel satisfaction. I felt confirmed. Every quiet frustration, every overlooked contribution. It had all meant something, not because I burned it down, but because I chose to build something better. That evening, a message from Barbara Kent, Summit's former HR coordinator, saw the news. They finally saw what happens when you fire the foundation. Proud of you. I typed a reply, paused, then erased it. Sometimes silence is the most honest response. 3 weeks later, I was invited to speak at a regional leadership conference. Topic: Quiet Leadership and Lasting Impact. At first, I almost said no. I thought about all the meetings at Summit where less qualified people talked over me, took credit and rose while I stayed invisible. I realized I wasn't invisible anymore, so I said yes. Standing on stage in front of 200 executives, I told the story, not of revenge or sabotage, but of perseverance, misjudgment, and the power of doing things the right way. I talked about being called just an assistant. I talked about the fall, the silence, the rebuilding. And most of all, I talked about leading with empathy, quiet strength, and unwavering integrity. Afterward, 3 young women, junior managers, approached me. One said, "I didn't think people like us could make it without compromising who we are." I smiled. We can, and we will. But you have to know your value, even when they don't. On the 1-year anniversary of my termination, Jenna and Tamara surprised me at the office with a cake, scrawled in chocolate across the top, to the woman they couldn't replace. I laughed, truly laughed, as our team gathered around. Jason had just accepted a director role in our southern region. Tamara was leading a new mentorship program. Jenna had been nominated for an industry award. Every single one of them was thriving, seen, growing. We raised our glasses, water, juice, coffee, it didn't matter. "To new beginnings," I said. "And to Allie," Jenna added. for proving you don't have to burn bridges to move forward. Sometimes, you just have to cross a better one. We clinked cups, and I looked around at the faces that once sat quietly in the background, now leading the room. We weren't the loudest, we weren't the flashiest, but we were the steady ones, the rocks, in the river. And in the end, we were the ones who won.